raised in Alaska. Today we're going to do an annual service of my Argo. That's going to entail quite a few things, but the first thing I'm going to do is take the tracks off so that I can check all of the axle bearings. Each tire has its own axle. The axles don't go all the way through, and so that means there's 4 tires on each side. There's 8 axles all the way around, and each axle then has 2 bearings, an external and an internal bearing. And so we're going to check all of those, which is a bit of a process, but it shouldn't take long once we get the tracks off. And then after we do that, we'll change all the fluids in it, check the axle bolts, check all the chains, and check a couple other things as we move along. So come along for a full service. So I'm underneath my Argo now, and I'm going to try to jack up one whole side. Okay, so I got this side off the ground, so I'll be able to check all of those. So the first step is to disable all of the chain tighteners, and you do that by rotating them. Okay, so once it's loose, you push it all the way down so that the chain is as loose as it can be here. Now with the chain loose here, I can move this axle, or try to move the axle to see if there's play in those bearings. First, I'll try to pull it in and out, and then you can see the tire's flat here, but there's no play that way. I'll move it up and down. There's no play that way, so this bearing is in really good shape. So now I just have to check the other 4 on this side, and then jack the other side up and check that side. So this one here, check this out. Can you hear that? It doesn't go in and out, but it goes up and down. So we're going to take this tire off and look at it. Look at the play in there. So this one here, boy, that's the only one on this side that we'll have to replace. And so I'm going to take it off the jack stands and do the same thing to the other side. I'll just leave this tire off. That'll be my reminder, or my marker, of which bearing this is. Interestingly enough, this is the same tire on the other side. You can see it moving right there. And so we'll have to replace that one as well. The first step in this process is going to be taking these chains off. There we go. Okay, so we got the clip off. And then this piece here comes off. Let's get that out of there now, we don't need it. This piece comes off here, and then this one comes out. That's your connecting link. And so now that chain is loose. Now we got to do the same thing to this one. And once that is done, then we can pull this out. You can loosen this and pull this axle out. I have the chains off both sides, so I'm going to go ahead and pull those out. I'll start by pulling out that axle bolt right there. Each of these sprockets has a set screw in it. And I take the set screws part way out. They should slide on there. Okay, so those are loose. Then I'll take this off. Both of these have 2 set screws on them. The gods are smiling upon us. I don't know that that's ever happened. Haha! 2 in a row, that is unbelievable. Okay, so we're going to take these to the parts washer and get them all washed up. We could put it back together like this and it wouldn't be horrible. It's just messy, and as long as you have a parts washer, and I got it this far apart, I might as well clean it all up, get all the gunk off of it, and it'll just make it easier to put everything back together. Okay, I've taken everything through the parts washer. I'm getting ready to put it back together. And if you notice, I've just been ripping through all these steps. I haven't given a lot of explanation. And the reason really is because I have videos that are step-by-step on this process. So if you really wanted to see step-by-step, I do have those videos, and I'll put that in the description to this video. Now I have the gasket, the body gasket on there. I'm going to put this on here. And so this is an aftermarket bearing. I have, I think, 3 on this machine already, and you can tell because I ground off the sight nipple there that aligns it in this outside roller. This is a factory bearing, and this is an aftermarket bearing. I'm going to put one of each on because that's what I have. And you can see that this one is just a hair wider. And then this is a grease port that'll have to line up later on. And to get to the grease port, I have to put this with the set screws on the outside, which I would prefer to have the set screws on the inside because the outside gets exposed to water, but it kind of sort of is what it is. So I'm going to use a thread locker on that eventually. And so I've just sprayed it with brake clean to make sure that it gets nice and clean because we want to get all the oil out of it. And this bearing has a set screw here. It has 2 set screws actually. I'm going to take them all the way out because I'm going to use thread lock on those too, and they might have grease on them. And so I'm going to want to get them cleaned up as well with brake clean. So you can see there's the flat spot there. I'm just tighten this down to the flat. Well, actually, it's going to go to this flat spot here, I'll bet you. There. There, and then I'll put it back in there. Okay, now with that in there, I've cleaned the back part of this, so I'm going to put the axle bolt in, tighten the axle bolt up, and it'll suck the whole thing this way, and then I can tighten these up. Okay, so that is tight. And I'm going to take these set screws out here. You can see on this, on the axle itself right there, there's a hole. Well, that lines up with that, and that set screw goes into it.
We're gonna do the same thing here. We're gonna look and see. You can see, well, I don't know if you can see it. I can see the hole, so I'm gonna line that up. So when I screw this in, it goes right into its own hole. And these set screws are different than the set screws that go on the bearing. These have like a nipple on them there that goes into the axle. So the whole inside of this is put together. I just got to put 4 bolts on the outside and I'm done with this one. Okay, see the grease port up on top, that little hole. It needs to be straight up at 12 o'clock because the zerk from the bearing holder, it will be straight up at 12 o'clock. And so you can see now, there's the little hole and here's the grease zerk. And so the grease zerk shoots right into that. Okay, so if you remember, we had some wiggle in here before. Ooh, and that's tight. Now we're going to do is put some grease into this because you can hear it. It's not gravelly, but it's not clean like you would have with grease in there. And so when you grease these, when the tires are on, you have to stick it through the hub, through the axle, and then onto here. Smoothing out. Let's give it a little bit more. What I'm trying to do is fill that all the way up, get all the air out of there. All right, so that one is done. So then we're just going to repeat the process on the other side. Put the chains on, put the tracks back on. I'm going to tell you, putting the chains on is probably the worst part. Not probably, it is the worst part of this whole thing. So when I look at this, I can see the outside sprocket is lined up with the back sprocket. And so this sprocket goes up to that one. I'll get the chain out there, and then once the chain is there, then I'll push the chain tightener all the way down and leave it there. But I do it, I mean, I've done it right now, but it's going to pop back up. Okay, so we got that on there. You can see it's poking through there. I'm going to put this master link on. And you just have to put the clip on to hold it into place. And there it is. Then I want to check this. I want the grease holes through the rims to be in the same place. So here it's like, what, 8 o'clock? And here it's 8 o'clock, and that way I can stop in one spot and grease the whole thing. I got all the chains on. And so next we'll put the tires on. This has a spacer on here that pushes the tires just a little bit further away from the Argo to make room for the tracks. You can see here there's a hole here that needs to line up with a hole there. All right, it is a new day. Thus far, what I've done is I've checked all the bearings on this machine. I've changed 2 bearings. The third tire on both sides had the bearings go out. I put 1 Argo bearing in there and 1 aftermarket bearing. Of the bearings that went out of them, 1 was an Argo bearing and the other was an aftermarket bearing that I put on this machine last year. I went back and looked at my film from last year and it's like, dang, I just changed that bearing. But at any rate, both those have been fixed and put on. 2 things to note. When I put the bearings on and put the sprockets on, I did not use never sees on those 2, and generally I do, but I'm not going to take them back apart to fix that. The other thing that I forgot to double check on here, but I'm sure that this wouldn't have mattered, but generally when you shake all those, if any of them are loose, you probably want to check that collar that goes over it first and make sure that it is tight. I think it was, but it's a little late now because I took those bearings off. One of the bearings, just feeling the bearing outside the machine, I can tell that it's loose. So for sure that one had problems. The other one, you can't feel it, but I'm going to take them apart and see later on. So what's left on this service then, and so this is an annual service. During an annual service, what I like to do is check all the bearings, and you know why then. Nobody wants to lose one of those out in the field, and I had 2 that I replaced this time. I'm going to grease the chains. I'm going to change the engine oil, change the transmission oil. I'm going to check all the axle bolts to make sure that they're tight. I'm going to check all the clips on the chains and make sure that they're in good shape. And then I'm going to check the brakes to make sure that there's lots of brake pad left on there. And then just do a visual inspection of everything else. Last season I changed the spark plugs in this thing and it made a significant difference. That's probably a once every 5 years thing really, or once every 100 hours or something like that. And then check the air cleaner. That's about it. And so far, all I've done is check the bearings. So I'm going to go ahead and finish the rest of this process today and get the tracks back on.
I got this just to make sure that hood doesn't come loose. Okay, to change the engine oil, I'm actually going to suck it out of the fill spot because it's hard to get to the bottom of this tub. To the bottom of the engine because of the tub. So we'll push this down in there. And this is a little so I got all the oil sucked out of it, so we'll go ahead and change the oil filter next. And there's the oil filter. And so we'll get that loosened off. New oil filter going on. It should take about 2 quarts. But I'm going to start with 1.5 quarts just in case I didn't get it all sucked out. Okay, that's 1.5. Now I'm going to start it up and run it because remember I changed the oil filter on it, and so oil filter will have some capacity. Well, I see it blew my funnel out. We'll get that in a second, but we'll check the oil level to start with. It's on the dipstick, but I'm going to put in another, probably 1/4 of a quart. Next, we're going to change the transmission oil. And you can see that there's some metal filings on that. We'll get that cleaned up. Okay, with that all pumped out of there, we'll put this back in there. And then you fill that one up right up on top of the transmission there through this fill cap here. There, and I'm going to fill it up until it's about halfway on that sight window right there. And for this, I'm going to use 80-90 gear weight oil. Let me just pop the top off of it here. All right. It's supposed to hold 1.2, but you never know if you got everything out of there. So, see how it goes.
So I'm going to watch this sight window here. I don't want that to be halfway filled with oil. There it is, you see it coming up. Okay. All right, engine oil, transmission oil, done. And so what this strap here does is when you go through ditches or you hit a bump, the frame flexes a little bit, and it's not uncommon that these pop off. And where it seems like they always pop off is when you drive down into a stream. Just when you hit the water and splashes up, this thing flops open. And so this is just the emergency don't come open on me strap. Now, if you remember, the air is out of the four corner tires, and that makes it so that you can pull these in, reduce the circumference to get these things tight, and then when we pump them back up, it tightens the tracks up. We always put these bolts from the inside to the outside. That way, if this comes loose and the bolt comes out, if the bolt was to come this way, it would tear up your tub. And these are a self-locking nut there. On the outside, it doesn't matter which way they go, to be honest. It's probably easier to tighten them if you go this way here. Now I'm going to tighten this all the way down, just so I know where it's at, and then I'm going to back it off about a half a turn, because I want that, about a turn there, because I want that hinge to be able to work. Okay, we got both the tracks on. I'm going to go ahead and grease these chains. So the only thing that I use on my chains is Corrosion X. This stuff kills rust and lubricates well. The green can is kind of like grease. We did that to rotate the chains. Okay, we're going to reinflate the tire. So right now, you can see that these things are super loose. And I'm going to put 5776. The rear tire has 6 in it. That's right on 6. And even though I didn't let air out of these tires, I'm going to check them on the way by. That's right at 7. We got 5776, and now look at the, that's a lot tighter. See that? I'll inflate the other side, and then we'll take it for a little test run, then we'll finish it up. The last 2 things we still have to do, we're going to check all the axle bolts on the inside, and we're going to check all the connecting links on the chain. Okay, axle bolts, those have been Loctited, and so I don't want to go gorilla on them and loosen them up, but that one is tight. And that one is tight. Those 2 I already did. I'm going to check the 2 in the front and see how they are. See, this chain tightener is still janked up. I'm interested to see how that plays out. Usually they self-tighten, and so we'll keep an eye on that in just a second. And then we want to look at all the connecting chain links. And we did these back too, so they should be good. So we just have to check the front too. And so this one was loose, and so I'm going to take that all the way out, spray it with brake clean, let it dry for a few hours, put Loctite on it, and screw it back in. And that one is tight. It's mostly this left-hand side is the side that I have troubles with, so I'm going to fix that one. I've checked all the connecting links in the front here, and so we're all good to go. And so that's the last. And then I want to check the brake shoes on this. Boy, you can't quite see them there. And so that's going to be for another day because I want to change these anyways. That's going to be a project. So I'm going to change these brake shoes, and then I have brakes down here. I'm going to probably change those this year too. So I'm just going to say I'm changing those anyways, but you'd want to check this brake and this brake here. So we're going to change both those though. Okay, so we'll take a look at how the chains work in here. Not that you haven't seen that in some of my other videos, but we'll look anyway. This is the drive axle. The drive axle then runs the front axle and goes back to the next axle. And from there then goes to this axle and to that axle. Here's the transmission for the reverse. Well, thanks for coming along over these last few days for this project. It's nice to have it done. We'll come back a little bit later on, fix the brakes, and I have another cool little project I'm going to do in the future.